else, you've experienced something you hadn't experienced before, and that changes us. Because part of what you have to be comfortable with learning is to realize, oh, I guess I was stupid before, right?
Thanks for listening to Guidance in Recovery. I'm Keegan Reed, and every week I speak with guests as we honestly explore recovery, sobriety, the struggles that come with it, and we find things that help us in our recovery journeys. Concluding this episode with Dr. Bruce Chalmer, we're wrapping up how faith works in recovery, and he's also giving us a head start into his video course to help couples in their relationships. And we're also figuring out that change means we may become someone that we didn't really know we could become. So be sure to check out the episode for the discount code for his video course and enjoy the show. Yeah, and like you said before, coming out of that cry, whenever everything is okay in the end, it does feel like a literal weight gets lifted off. It feels like my chest opens up and is like, hey, we're ready to feel again, whatever that may mean. Mm-hmm. And sometimes that new feel, here's something I kind of got to ask real quick. Before I ask that, where can people find you? And I believe you have a new book out as well, correct?
I do, yes. Oh, let me talk about that. Yes, sure. I can be quick. Yeah, they can find me at my website's the best place to go. It's simply brucechalmer.com, BruceChalmer, brucechalmer.com. That will get you information about all the various things that I'm involved with, including, indeed, my most recent book, which is called, believe it or not, The Passion Paradox, as we mentioned. The subtitle there is When You Feel Miles Apart and Still Love Each Other. So it's for folks, especially in that situation. And I am even more excited, if I may put it that way, to talk about something I developed after I released that book, which is a video course, a self-paced video course with the same title. And you'll find information about that on my website as well. And the video course, I will briefly tell you the motivation for that, why I think it's a good thing. The motivation here is I realized that we've been talking about the passion paradox, this bit about stability and intimacy and the fact that they're somewhat in conflict. Mm-hmm. I give a little mini lecture about that every first session with a couple. Have there been some exceptions? Rarely. Almost every first session with a couple for at least the last 20 years. And probably longer, I've been including that as part of it. It's part of how we structure that first session. After the first session, it's much looser. It's more like improv theater, I like to say. It's like we follow the meaning where it goes. I'm the yes and. It's like, wow, let me hear more about that, as opposed to freaking out and shutting, or categorizing, whatever. But the first session is part of the structure is I let people know about it. And so often, it seems like most of the time, it's kind of a light bulb moment for couples. They'll say, oh, hadn't thought of it that way. And things immediately, that doesn't solve all their problems, but they start to feel differently. It's like, oh, geez, hadn't realized. Yeah, that is kind of what we're doing. That totally resonates. They say that all the time. Well, I had this sudden revelation after I wrote a book about it. I said, wait a minute. If I create a video course, people can do that before they have a first session. People could do that before they have a session with me or anybody else. I can give them that light bulb moment without their having to sign up for a session. They can do it in, a nice thing about self-paced video courses is you can do it in the privacy of your own home at your own pace. You can do it with your partner or separately, even if your partner isn't ready for therapy, which of course is a huge chunk of folks out there. One of them wants to do therapy and the other doesn't, or they know they're in trouble, but they haven't decided they want therapy. They have good reason for being cautious about that. And I realized, well, do my video course. Yeah. So there's my little plug for my video course. If people go to brucechalmer.com, there's a menu item courses and you can find out about it there.
Awesome. Thank you for putting that out there because I think that many people will love to do that because if they're in the safety of their own home, then they're much more willing to go deep into the dark abyss of emotions. Yes. And that again is the scary part, because whenever we go in there, we may come out different. And we may not like the version that comes out.
We will come out different somehow. It's like, if nothing else, you get a lot of, it's not just insight in a cognitive sense. You've experienced something you hadn't experienced before, and that changes us. That's an interesting thing. The way I structured that video course is in 3 parts, actually. You can do part 1 on its own. And then that's the part that really gives you that, I hope, gives you that light bulb moment. And the last section of that part of part one is actually how to know if you should call it quits or not. And again, I don't tell you that. I don't tell anybody that. But I provide a structured way of sort of, there's a lot of structured exercise. You got to work when you do this course. You're not just sitting there watching a talking head, but it's part of the work that you're doing there is leading you toward at least tentatively making that decision. And I very much have a bias in favor of saying, I'm not sure I want to split up. If you're not sure, don't split up yet. Now again, not for me to tell anybody what to do or not do, but I'm saying I do have a bias towards saying at least don't break up too soon, because you won't learn what you need to learn. And if you break up too soon, you'll just repeat the same thing with somebody else. It won't do you any good. If you learn what you need to learn, you may still decide to break up. That may be part of what you learn. It's like, we are two good people. I've learned these skills, these important skills, but we're just not right for each other. Okay, that's a bummer, but at least that's a form of healing. But anyway, so that part one leads you there. Part two, I call learn the skills. But that's where you learn the skills that will let you actually set up some action plans to make change. And part three is, I call it be the change, which, by the way, wasn't Gandhi. Everybody thinks, wasn't Gandhi the one who said that? Somebody else said it first. There's a totally random note for you to Google if you want. And that's where you actually set up practical action plans to deal with your particular situation. So I have I think it's 14 different videos in that one covering different, you may not want all of them. Mostly it's different aspects of the problems you might be having in your relationship. And based on your understanding of that, you actually create plans for what are you going to do to start towards solution. So that's what the three parts are. But as I say, part one stands on its own. So
yeah, that's awesome. I think that fits really well because you get to have that eureka moment. You get to build your base of getting those skills, and then you get to move forward from there, putting it into action. And that's where a lot of the hard stuff is in all of this, right? Because we can sit there and we can think about it all we want. I did a session with someone not too long ago on their podcast where we kind of dove into my childhood and stuff like that, and found out that, one of my trauma things is I've been thinking everything forever. I've not been feeling as deeply as I could because feelings were bad. Feelings were not meant to happen. They were scary. They would get me in trouble. And so it was like learning to drop into my body and accept that kind of stuff was really weird. And it's something, like you said before, it's a skill. I've got to work on it. I got to stop thinking. And whenever I think about that, it's like, well, how do I go about doing everything if I don't have to think about it?
Well, and even that's paradoxical, because thinking is part of that. Do you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, it's funny somewhere in there. I think I say this in one of my exercises, like, don't overthink it, but even that requires some thought. So that's all. It occurs to me, Keegan, I'm not sure, you can tell me if this is the right thing to do, but I want to offer your viewers and listeners a discount code for 20% off.
Okay.
What works for you?
Let's go with retrieve.
Retrieve. Okay. Yeah. I will do that. Retrieve. So when people hear this or see it, and I got to remember to do this right after we're done, which won't take long, I will create a discount code for 20% off any of those three parts, actually. And the word will be retrieve.
Awesome. Well, thank you for doing that, man.
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity. Yeah.
Of course. It's great to be able to speak with another man about this kind of stuff, because emotions, kind of like we talked about, they're not meant for guys, or it's portrayed in our culture that we're not supposed to feel, Yeah. And the last card that I had come up was in the deck I use. It's an alternative to the judgment card, but it's called Awakening, and it is getting to a new you, essentially. And I mean, that's kind of what I feel like we've been talking about too, without even going there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. That is it. The kind of actions, I'm talking about making an action plan, which is sounds kind of, I don't know, technocratic or something, but it's very deeply emotional. It's like, yes, to be willing to take that risk of actually doing something substantively different is how you get out of that.
Hmm.
That's how you can get back to yourself and break out of that perceived trap.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the weird part, right? Because it's perceived to us that it is a trap. We have to be willing to kind of take that step, but we may be a different person in a lot of senses that our partner may not even recognize. We may not even recognize in the mirror.
Absolutely. And I love that you included both of that, Yeah. Never mind. I don't know who you are. I don't know who I am either,
Yeah.
and I say that not by way of saying, oh, I better find out. No, I think that's one of those lovely paradoxes that
Hmm.
no, we can never totally know who we are because we're always a work in progress. And then there's that, and I'm sure a physicist would say, oh, don't use it this way, but I'm going to use it anyway. The Heisenberg uncertainty principle. What Heisenberg said was, I think boy, if you have physicists listening to this, they can write it and tell me I'm full of baloney, which won't be the first time. Um, Basically, you can measure the location or the velocity, I think, of an electron, but not both at the same time, because
Oh,
as soon
yeah.
as what your observation changes it.
Hmm.
That's the point. So, applying that concept to psychology,
Hmm.
that's the trouble with introspection. Some
Hmm.
of the earliest psychologists back in the late 1800s, when they were first starting to use that term even, were introspectionists. They said, well, let me look into my own feelings and that will teach me stuff. And of course it can. But the trouble is, as soon as I look into my own feelings, I've changed them.
Yeah.
Right. So as soon as you change a system, you've changed the system. It feeds back on itself. So you can never really know. I can't know who I am. Static knowledge is death, basically. It's like at that point, then there ain't me anymore. And it's
Hmm.
interesting. I love to give a shout out to the Buddhists, which is I'm sure a sweeping over, probably largely ignorant term on my part. Well, I read about Buddhism, 50 years ago when I
Hmm.
was interested in it. And there's various forms of Buddhism. And again, so in addition to the physicists writing in and saying I'm full of, the Buddhists can do the same thing. I respect that. But having said all that, Buddhists have a wonderful way, I think, of recognizing that sense of anxiety about death.
Hmm.
Their solution, I'm sure this is my lay person's understanding of it. The way they deal with death is just to say, basically, what makes you think you're alive?
Ooh.
You're all afraid of dying, but this whole business of being an independent self that starts at whenever birth, conception, whatever you want to say, and ends
Hmm.
at death, that's an illusion. We're
Hmm.
all part of the big story all the time. Whatever time means, we're all part of it together. So so relax. That's basically, they're saying, don't get so attached.
Huh.
The one of the source of, I think it was one of the Buddha's, noble truths, the
Hmm.
source of human suffering is attachment to illusion.
Yeah.
And that
Yep.
attachment to living as an individual, and I have to have my needs met and everything, that they're saying is largely an illusion. So when you let go of that, then you still, like to have chocolate if you like chocolate. It's okay. You still get to enjoy stuff. You still get to
Uh-huh.
want stuff, but it doesn't have that edge of, oh my God, everything depends on this.
Hmm. Yeah.
And so, that I think that's an interesting way of doing it. Now, I'm not a Buddhist in the sense that, it doesn't seem to fit who I am.
Hmm.
I really like the wisdom of that, but I also like the notion that no, we freak out sometimes. That's part of being human too, and which of course Buddhists recognize as well. So I don't want to.
No, I love those comparisons because the one that comes to my mind whenever you're talking about like measuring something and changing the outcome of it is like this split wall or slit wall electron
Well, of course, yes,
experiment.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's quantum. Yeah, quantum mechanics is all about that
Hmm.
recognition. Yeah,
Yeah, and like you said, I haven't really thought about it that way before. Where if I look at what I'm thinking and feeling, it's going to change it. And I mean, we are just a bunch of electrons if you think about it, and so that would make sense. And it's something that I've heard in the recovery rooms, like self can't reveal self to self.
hmm
And so it's like you have to have that introspection aspect to know what questions to ask the outside world or so on and so forth because other people are our mirrors, you
yeah,
know?
yeah.
And that's a scary thing to understand too.
It is. When you noted we're all just a bunch of electrons. Yes, I mean, of course that's true, but I love
Uh,
the more paradox there. And I'll shout out to an author, one of those books that Yeah, and there have been many in my life. I've read a lot of books, but there haven't been many that like was sort of life changing. But this
Hmm.
is one I read back in my 20s. It was written when I was in my, I think, mid to late 20s, in the 1970s we're talking about. Gödel Escher Bach, An Eternal Golden Braid by Douglas Hofstadter. So the nerdiest folks among your listeners, and I'm a recovering nerd myself with frequent relapses. Here's one right now. Anyway, he writes about these multi levels. It's like, yes, we're all electrons, but we're also patterns of electrons,
Mm.
and at the level of simply, we're atoms too. We're not just
Uh-huh.
electrons, right? Well, our atoms are interacting in all sorts of ways that you couldn't necessarily predict from the electrons.
Hmm.
And then clump all that stuff together and you get these various body parts, which are all acting in various ways that are, we think of as more or less coordinated. But, look what happens when people have, there's corpus callosum severed. The split brain stuff is fascinating work. I remember
Hmm.
learning about that in graduate school. It's really interesting how, yeah, literally your left hand doesn't know what your right hand is doing in those cases. It's bizarre. And people with various kinds of, brain injuries or lesions or things like that can demonstrate this very strange stuff. Like we're a bunch of systems that are more or less coordinated, but not always.
Hmm.
And so there's that level. And then there's the level of we're also systems. We're also families and tribes and cultures and nations and all of those things. And every level is operating rather differently from the other level. So I remember
Hmm.
is another name I remember reading about years ago. Gregory Bateson wrote about this. He said, well, so you could discover that something, when you say, is something good for the ecology or not, depends on what level you're talking about.
Yeah.
There are people who will say, as far as the general other species on Earth, human beings are a calamity.
Yeah.
From a human perspective, we're not. I don't think we are. It's like,
No.
oh, from a human perspective, we're not. From a human perspective, fleas are a calamity.
Yeah.
But from fleas' perspective, we're a calamity. It just depends on what level you want to look at. And so our eventual extinction at some higher level, someone could say, well, from the standpoint of some higher level of, how are things going? That's just what the earth needed because these humans really caused a lot of damage.
Uh-huh.
It just depends what level you're looking at.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that because it's really that whole perception thing again. How are we going to look at everything? And it also, I think, brings it back in that faith aspect. Like, what meaning are we going to assign all of this
Yes.
humanness?
Yeah.
And
There's
that's
something right about it. That's all I'm saying. That's
yeah.
right. There's something right. Even the bit about the potential. I mean, if you look at it from a scientific perspective, we're going to extinguish eventually. I mean, eventually the sun burns out. There's that.
Yeah.
But even aside from that, it just seems, as an old statistician that I am, I'm thinking, yeah, likely, the conditions for life came about, and here
Hmm.
we are, and eventually they won't work anymore. And isn't that interesting? And that doesn't render the whole thing meaningless. That's what I mean by faith. It's like, no, it's meaningful anyway. Isn't that a riot?
Yeah. And I mean, it is a riot. One of the things I was going to ask before, as I've healed, I've come to kind of think or maybe feel that I'm more sensitive in some aspects, but it's because I'm getting to those layers that have been numbed that whole time.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you learn and you appreciate things on a different level. And of course, I think part of being able to do that, and here I speak as an old guy. I say, I'm qualified to speak as an old guy because
Uh-huh.
I'm mid-70s, that there's something about it, I think, when it goes well, that as you learn, you become more comfortable with learning, because part of what you have to be comfortable with learning is to realize, oh, I guess I was stupid before, right? And because I didn't know,
Yeah.
and you get more comfortable with that. And they say, no, 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 I wasn't stupid before. I was doing the best I could then, and I'm doing the best I can now. And if I'm lucky, if I'm fortunate, then, a year, 2, 3 down the line, I will look back at now and think, boy, I was stupid then, wasn't I? but, but I won't beat myself up about that. It's like, oh, look at that. Look at how much I've continued to learn. Well, to
Hmm.
do that, you have to have great compassion for yourself and everyone else.
Hmm.
You know why we keep learning? Because we don't know. There's lots of stuff we don't know. That's a good thing too.
Yeah. It really reminds me of that saying that, like, you can't beat yourself up for the things that only time could teach you,
Yeah,
you
of
know?
course. And yet
And,
we do all the time.
hmm.
That's what I wrote about my previous book about betrayal.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God, that's how people feel about betrayal all the time. It's like, how can I be so stupid? That's the first step in healing from that is to forgive yourself for that. It's like, no, you weren't stupid. You're just human.
Yeah.
You only knew what you knew. You can't, like you just said, you can't possibly, don't bother beating yourself up for things that only time could teach you. Yeah, you
Mm-hmm.
couldn't have known what you didn't know until you knew it.
Yep.
Yeah.
And I think that we like to try to avoid those pitfalls. We try to avoid that emotional destruction that comes along with change a lot of the time, you know? And kind of like what you were saying, death and or life is kind of an illusion. The way that I think about it a lot of the time is going through this healing process, or really going through traumas itself is a death in its own right, because
Absolutely.
going through traumas, you're not the same person on the other side of that trauma. Going
That is,
through healing,
yep.
you're not the same person that the traumatized version of you was.
And indeed, one of the things I've noted, and I certainly wrote about this in my book on betrayal, when people go through that, again, here's faith again, when in the presence of faith, they will often be grateful for that lesson.
Mm-hmm.
And it's amazing to hear people be grateful for what are otherwise awful things. And again, you talk about betrayals. Again, nobody's ever said, "Oh, thanks for cheating," but they have often said, "Wow, this crisis has really benefited us."
Mm-hmm.
And I actually had somebody I've talked about a lot on podcasts and in my book, who actually turned to her husband after a lot of amazing work about healing from his infidelity, and said, "Hey, thanks for taking one for the team."
Oh.
And what she meant by that was he's the one who had to feel guilty because he did the thing that is, of course, morally wrong. But
Oh.
they needed, she was now, this is again, like a year and a half later,
Uh-huh.
she is now saying, "Oh my God, we are so much better off than we were before this happened,
Mm-hmm.
that I appreciate that growth."
Mm-hmm.
And you're the one who has to feel like you did the immoral thing, which you did. I mean, there, and he was he got that. He smiled,
Uh-huh.
he understood that. It's like, oh yeah,
Yeah.
he did feel appropriately guilty. Of course he did, but he wasn't wallowing in it either, because he was also appreciative of that growth.
Mm.
And that's true. And the same thing I've noted in talking with people who are in wheelchairs because they were in some sort of horrible accident and
Mm-hmm.
they lost the use of their legs, let's say.
Mm-hmm.
And numbers of people I've talked to over the years, and it's not a specialty of mine, but I certainly worked with plenty of folks who were in wheelchairs, and they will often say, they'll often bring it up, more than me. Would I have gotten in the car or gotten on the motorcycle if I'd known I was going to have that accident? Well, on the one hand, no, who the hell wants to go through an accident?
Mm-hmm.
On the other hand, and again, this takes time to get to, numbers of people have said things like, well, I like who I am now. And I wouldn't be who I am now had I not gone through that. So I
Mm-hmm.
really wouldn't change it,
Yeah.
even though I don't wish an accident on anybody.
Yeah.
But here I am, and I'm so grateful for what I have learned that was more or less forced on me by going through that.
Mm.
So that's faith. That's what I mean by faith.
I think that's a really powerful way to look at it. And I mean, that is that kind of maturity that I thought I had whenever I was a teenager, you know? And it's one of those things that looking back at it, it's like, was I really that mature? No.
Yeah, but you thought you were. Well, you were compared to how you were when you were younger, So.
Yeah, this is true.
Yeah.
We can only compare the things that we actually know and experience ourselves. And I think that's a huge thing that we got to work with that faith aspect. It doesn't necessarily rely on the facts. It relies on the meaning that we assign to the facts.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's a mindset. I talk about that in the course. It's a mindset.
Yeah.
And because it's a mindset, it's not something you can read in a book, and just sort of, okay, I believe that, check. It's something you actually have to practice. It's a skill to be practiced.
Mm-hmm.
It's a skill of faith.
Yeah.
And how do you do that? Well, ideally get yourself around teachers who embody it, because you'll pick it up from them. And you can find them all over the place, and you can also find them, you can also find people that you wish were like that who aren't. and even in roles where you wish they would be, like teachers or therapists or clergy or people like that. But sometimes you can find people in those roles or 12-step sponsors, people like that, who can be amazingly, the thing I like to say I offer the folks I work with more than anything else is faith. That's what I'm offering. And I don't do it by preaching it. I try to do it by actually embodying it, which is to say, starting off with the essential assumption that the people I'm working with are basically decent and basically sane and basically intelligent, and you start from there. Those are all statements of faith.
I love that. Well, Bruce, it has been an absolute honor and pleasure having you back on the show again. And I just got to say to everyone out there, thank you for listening to Retrieving Sanity on WDJY 99.1 FM. And as always, try to love yourself, love others if you can, but you got to try to love yourself first. Try to be your favorite version of yourself today, and just, try to practice some faith, because it's a skill. It's a mindset. Let's have fun with it. Call 988 if you're having a mental crisis, or you can even text 741-741 if you don't want to talk to someone. But just try your best, and we'll see y'all in the next episode. Until then, much love. Shalom.